Einen wunderschönen guten Abend im Westfälischen Kunstverein. Mein Name ist Theresa Rösler, ich bin Direktorin hier am Kunstverein und freue mich sehr, dass ihr so zahlreich erschienen seid. Ich halte mich ganz kurz, denn der Abend wird gehostet oder wurde auch entwickelt von Texte zum Nachdenken. Das sind Benedikt Bock und Sanna Helena, die heute nicht nur, ich glaube, du bist 14 Stunden angereist aus der Schweiz, hin einen langen Weg auf sich genommen haben, sondern auch sehr viel Energie und Gedanken in die Konzeption dieses Abends. Ich begrüße ganz kurz auf Deutsch. Die Lesungen werden aber auf Englisch stattfinden. Wir haben Übersetzungen. Vielen Dank, Berfin, an dich. Wo bist du dort? Dass du die nochmals überprüft hast. Die liegen hier aus. Die Lesungen sind zwischen 10 und 30 Minuten. Dazu werden Sarah und Bena jetzt auch gleich noch was sagen, aber die herzliche Einladung, diese Texte auch zu nutzen. Wir können die hier gerne auch noch ein bisschen verteilen, damit mitgelesen werden kann. Und an dieser Stelle ein ganz, ganz großer Dank an euch beide, an Texte zum Nachdenken. Man kann das recht schön auf dem Poster, was hier als Merch ausgestellt ist, nachlesen. Es hat viele Veranstaltungen letztes Jahr gegeben und ich freue mich sehr, dass ihr sozusagen aus diesem Gründungskontext in Zürich herausgetreten seid und auch an anderen Institutionen, anderen Orten präsent seid und jeweils Veranstaltungen nicht nur entwickelt, sondern auch hostet und moderiert. Und an dieser Stelle darf ich an euch übergeben. Einen ganz herzlichen Applaus für Bena und Sarah.
Ja, hallo, schönen guten Abend. Ich bin Benedikt, das ist Sarah. Wir sind beide Künstlerinnen und machen Texte zum Nachdenken. Das hier ist die insgesamt 24. Veranstaltung. Ich habe das 2020 angefangen in Zürich und Sarah hat irgendwann mal aus ihrem Projekt mit Jackie Grassmann gelesen. Daraus ist dann ein sehr interessiertes Gespräch geworden, aus dem ist noch mehr geworden und dann diese Zusammenarbeit quasi. Jetzt machen wir das seit 2023 zusammen und Sarah ist in Berlin, ich bin in Zürich und jetzt tingeln wir quasi zwischen Institutionen und freuen uns sehr, dass wir heute hier sein können. Vielen Dank für die Einladung, Theresa, vielen Dank, dass das möglich ist und wir freuen uns auf einen spannenden Abend mit 3 Lesungen. Jetzt schaue ich mir schnell auf meinen Zettel. Genau, die Künstlerinnen sind eigentlich noch nicht vorgestellt worden. Ich sage mal ganz schnell ihren Namen. Das ist einmal Sanna Helena Berger, Céline Mathieu und Becket MWN. Ich habe noch nicht gesagt, was Texte zum Nachdenken ist. Texte zum Nachdenken ist eine Reihe für künstlerisches Schreiben oder Text als künstlerische Praxis, das laut unserer Definition oder was wir suchen, ist eigentlich Schreiben, das sich quasi aus der Kunst heraus definiert. Das heißt, Künstlerinnen, die mit Text arbeiten und ihre Texte, Bücher, Performances quasi eigentlich in einen bildenden Kunstkontext stellen. Korrigiere mich oder erweitere mich. Oder stell doch Céline vor.
Okay, mache ich. Genau, vielen Dank. Ich muss es nicht korrigieren und nicht erweitern. Der Abend wird so ablaufen, wir haben 3 Lesungen von 3 Lesenden, 3 Künstlerinnen und dazwischen jeweils circa 15 Minuten Pause. Das heißt, ihr könnt dann rausgehen, euch noch einen Drink holen und dann haben wir einen Mini-Umbau und dann geht es weiter. Genau. Und ich stelle jetzt kurz unsere erste Lesende vor, Céline Mathieu, allerdings auf Englisch. Die Texte werden auch auf Englisch sein. Céline Mathieu is an artist and writer focused on the circulation of thoughts and materials. Her practice is both conceptual and visceral. It takes the shape of sculptural installations that often combine sound, scanned text and different materials. Alongside that, a rambly reading and writing practice and her odd-stretched sound work are aired on the radio and performed in different contexts. And I'm super happy. Where's Céline? Actually, I'm looking wrong place. I'm super happy that she's here. Thank you so much, and I will hand on the mic to you now, right? Okay, thank you. Thank you all for coming.
The car arrives in the allotted spot, and the sound of it parking fills the air around it with anticipation. As if anything may culminate into more than walking, sitting, dancing, sleeping, or shouting, dinner is ready, dolls move around. The hands holding them disappeared, rendered invisible, and now a doll comes bumping down the stairs, 2 straight legs at a time. The ribbing of a thumbnail on a comb, and before and after, everything is mouth. Mouth, the edge of the table, your tongue against the window, cold, the mirror, nose gets wet, damp, breath. Your mouth, the plastic, the slice of watermelon, flour on the bread crust, tongue on a doll's foot, and the smell, the way your doll smells. And in the mouth, the ripped comb against your lower teeth now, and kiwi skin brushing against your lips, and the U-shaped hand of the Playmobil not quite fitting your lower lip. The scent of Play-Doh, the taste of aluminum paper in your back teeth, the stickiness of lemonade when it's between you and the wasp, the weight of the lid of the wooden box with the dress-up clothes, the stingy dress, your mom's robe and your tongue against it, or sucking water out of the towel, tasting bath water, drinking bath water, straight up vomiting bath water on the clean white cotton singlet. His tongue on mine, really soaked cornflakes, Rice Krispies getting attached to your tongue, bonbons clattering against your teeth, the trying to slide over different types of floors, sensing through foot soles burnt on the sand, carpet, cold, tiles, wet, pool, tiles, waxed wood, the feeling of stepping on a toy, your tongue again licking the apple, feeling the sharp edge and the grainy texture, finding that red means anger and feelings live in the chest, catching rain and puddles, everything. A grandmother calling something wet water, and similarly painting without cause and effect, pure satisfaction. Under you, there is her now. She pulls the bread knife's ribble along the edge of the table and grabs a book, whispers vowels and syllables, imitates reading. And she stands on the countertop to reach, squeezing banana with her hands. Her misdirected anger, she missed you, misconstrued retrograde anger, and cavallo and Pippi Longstrumpf in Danish. She trots and water paints. And not these socks, but those and all sorts of momentary pressings. Fingers in mouth or wet from it, snot lines across her face and the sheets drying and holding, all white, daylight. She's trotting about the room, clothes on dolls and off them, and their stiff limbs against, almost bending, almost ripping the sleeve as you feel you twist them apart to fit the arm in the hole of the sleeve. And odd how it fits then, on the chest, over the shaped chest, panels of fabric, the tiny garment. And hair on some of them, the smell of My Little Pony, its hair on your face, and the hard but soft plastic curve cupping your face. The feeling of a teddy bear's ear and neck and how you hold them, sweating their hairs into patches and holding it in such a way you wouldn't hurt or age them too quickly. The love for that pampin, Mother's touch, her flat hand heating the middle of your back, lips tempting the forehead, asleep at the beach on her shoulder, the feeling of her coat, his yellow woolen sweater over his hard belly, stingy wool smelled like cigarettes from others. His hard belly, like a pregnant woman, I would press my head against it in the elevator. The little girl presses 2 cows in my lap and spits out a full round cherry tomato, a big O. I find a little pool of sweat in the shell of my ear, maybe a remnant of the child showing me her comfort by grabbing my nipple as I carry her, interrupting my ease as she holds onto my nervous ends. Hastily, whenever she gets the opportunity, she presses my shirt aside and transposes the habit of holding her parent's nipple to mine. So in the street, or now, while writing this, she clenches me. Her intensity, not sure how to respond to, but I let the child find comfort and whatever other nutrient in my shirt. I wonder what is more or would be less confusing, and all the while try to numb the nervous ends of my breasts that tense and grow nervous under her touch. She crawls over the floor on her knees, arms stretched, bottom up, and as she slid over the floor, her fingers snake around as if casting a spell. She makes sound of faded despair as she feels kept from fusion. Tomorrow morning, one of the first images I will see will be from a performance that took place in New York. The image shows a performer in exactly the same pose as a little girl, exorcising feelings of longing, continuous love, and attention. Here, she sits on that lap, and this is her childhood. Her face, still painted like a frog, she holds onto her parent, asks to see something drawn, and when we cannot understand what she wants to see drawn, she grabs the pen, pulls it over the page, and adds 4 dots around it and points at it, shouting in recognition the name of the mysterious thing she had been asking to see. Here, I close my eyes at her and hold it for a while, and she does it back at me, retreating to cat language because she's ill and she speaks 4 languages, but scrambled and not today. The drawing on the wall shows scribbles of color, and her breathing is still thick with an earlier tantrum. The pillow very soft as in fluffily supporting her head, and her spit is audible at times. Earlier, something sounded like wind. I wonder if it was a parent imitating the wind to soothe her. Soft, her breakfast, but firm when she gestures away with both hands, and her feelings in all possible directions, but all away, away. She asks for the fork to come flying from the sky. I imagine the muesli and cow milk soaked now as time lapsed between then and now. Time slipping through all slits here. A child recalls thoughts on absorption, loss, and the passing of things. Plastic dishes and bowls, and bright colored cutlery, temporary used toys, plays and cuffs of which you can just feel the slime for them. Runny noses and tears as key communicators. I taste the blood on my knee after running while looking backward. I run, my blood tastes like. Soon it will itch the crust, not to scratch, not to scar. Like the poetry I read yesterday, the way childhood cuts mid-line. Double tempo in a sentence, cut up but continuing. Life, double tempo, time. The nipple thing has to stop with all of us. We discuss getting her a little piece of silk instead.
Becket MWN is an Amsterdam-based writer and artist. He received his MFA from the University of Southern California in 2014 and was a resident artist at the Rijksakademie in Amsterdam from 2015 to 17. In his recent projects, he extends the logic of certain images and events to question aspects of contemporary experience, such as distributed presence, the circulation of critique, and violence and latency, among others. Becket's projects both serve as close readings of these figures, as well as speculations on their significance more broadly, which his exhibitions, performances, and installations give form to a spoken and printed text, audio, and sculpture. He has also recently begun writing art criticism under the name Becket Flannery as an editor at the Netherlands-based platform Tangents.
Can everyone hear me okay? Does this sound good? Yeah. So I had a friend who told me that I sound like the television when I speak. And so I thought it would be nice to start writing like the television. And so I've been doing that for the last couple years. And this text that I'm going to read for you today is a bit of a bridge between a project that I finished a year ago or a couple years ago about twins in films, and a second project that I'm sort of beginning now, or a research project that I'm beginning now about this idea of the king's two bodies, which you'll hear about in this text, so I won't explain what that is yet. But yeah, so this process of writing is a little bit like a research, ongoing thinking process. So I'm very happy to share it with you. Part one. Oh wait, sorry. The last thing is, the last paragraph that I will read, you also have a German translation, of course, I think, of the whole text, but there's a second translation of that paragraph in the text you have. And the second translation is one that I did for a performance of this text when I just thought somehow, because it was about my own experiences, it felt strange to hear it in German. So I had a friend of mine who was translating and also voicing the text with me for that piece. And I asked him just about similar experiences he had, and so we just translated it with what he remembers from the exact same day. So there you have sort of a translation of a different kind. But you have both versions in your handout, so. Okay, sorry about that. Part one. It was market day in Amsterdam. A hot, sweltering sun baked tourists and locals alike. The fish shop next to the market square has been in business since the 1980s, when it was founded by the fish seller Hugo de Groot, and is now a father-son operation with his youngest son, Jort. Usually the shop was a sleepy place where fish fillets basked undisturbed under the fluorescent lights, reclining on beaches of ice. On market day, however, an unwelcome flow of customers passes through Hugo and Jort's little shop, and they must try to keep up appearances. Hugo began to flip the fish around to show their good sides and gave them a light dusting. Jort looked on, unimpressed by this weekly ritual, leaning in the doorway to the bathroom where father and son play checkers in the quieter moments. Just put out one, said Jort. Why would I do that? Hugo replied, continuing to flip his fish on their basins of ice. People buy it if they think it's the last one, even if they want tuna, say, albacore or mahi-mahi. They'll buy it if they think there's only one left. But this fish is nothing like tuna, Hugo objected. This fish has a round taste. It's subtle. Tuna tastes sharp, metallic, like blood or pennies. Hjort, as if this was the 100th time the two had discussed the topic, replied, I know that. I know how tuna tastes. It's not about flavor. It's not? No. It's about fear of logistics. Just then, a sharply dressed woman entered the shop. Her name was Nadia, and until stepping into the fish shop that day, she was someone completely different. I won't describe for you what she was like beyond the walls of the Fischhandel de Groot. That would be completely irrelevant. Suffice it to say, when she asked Hugo about the price of fish, this was something she would never do in any other circumstance. Excuse me, how much is this fish? Hugo didn't even look up from his slow manipulation of the fish. He simply replied, I'm afraid I couldn't say. It doesn't have a price. He didn't say that, Hjort interjected, speaking on behalf of his father, something he seemed in the habit of doing. He said, I'm afraid I couldn't say. Nadia threw Hjort a slightly impatient look. Excuse me, are you buying this fish? No, I'm not an interested party, he replied, and took a step back, wandering to the rear of the shop. There he started to fiddle with a thermostat, as if to demonstrate his indifference to the discussion at hand. Look, is the fish for sale or not? Of course it is, Hugo replied. It's not part of my personal collection. It has no sentimental value. This is not an aesthetic enterprise. It is a place of commerce, so of course it has a price. I just can't tell you what that is. Excuse me, so it has a secret price? Hugo finally looked up from his fish. This was clearly the moment he had been waiting for all morning. Don't be ridiculous. Price is a negotiation between supply and demand, a rational allocation of resources in a world of scarcity. There cannot be a secret price any more than there can be a private language. A price without the confirmation of the market is just a meaningless abstraction. Secret price, my God. Why do you even care so much? Hjort shouted from the corner of the shop. You can buy this one over here. It's $14.99 per kilo. That's not the point. I want to know the price of this fish. I'm afraid I couldn't say, Hugo repeats. Yes, you already said that. If I don't know the price, how am I supposed to know what it's worth? If I don't know what it's worth, how will I know if I even want it? How do I know if it's gaining or losing value? If we don't know the price of things, how will I know if it's the right time to buy? If I am better off now than I was 4 years ago? If things are going in the right direction, how am I supposed to answer these questions? A heavy silence hung in the wake of Nadia's tirade. A slightly shocked expression sat on Hugo's face. Hjort continued to play with the thermostat. I empathize with your situation, Hugo reassured her, and I can tell you that this fish is a solid investment. Although the price is probably higher than you'd like, I just couldn't say what that is. Oh my God, whatever! And with that, Nadia stormed out. Part 2. I really like films with doubles, doppelgangers and twins in them. Usually the twin is not a real pair of twins, but rather a special effect that takes 2 different shots of an actor and combines them in a single frame. That's how Lindsay Lohan can meet with her twin sister, also played by Lindsay Lohan, in The Parent Trap, or Jeremy Irons can walk down a hallway with himself in David Cronenberg's Dead Ringers. Have you ever seen the film Us? It was directed by Jordan Peele and was released in 2019. In the film, all of us, whoever we are, have a doppelganger or double living in a subterranean tunnel beneath our world. The doppelgangers in us are tethered by an invisible force to their above-ground counterparts, whom they crudely pantomime in a maze of concrete rooms and hallways. So in Peele's film, there would be some bunker far below us, where our doppelgangers would be arranged as we are now, and my doppelganger would be reading to your doppelgangers, but probably more like just grunting and twitching. We learned that these doubles were created by an unnamed government entity as a kind of experiment, but have since been abandoned. As the windowless, painted, cinder block hallways and tiled floors that they dwell in suggest, they have been given over to the care of some kind of institution, a prison, a school, a hospital, or a psychiatric ward. Whatever their original intention, they now constitute a population to be tended, fed, and administered, a difficult remainder. They are institutionalized. The plot of the film begins in 1986, when a young girl from the surface, Adelaide, wanders to the threshold of the underground, where she meets her doppelganger. The double, named Red, imprisons Adelaide and switches clothes with her before taking her place above ground. While their outfits are similar, the clothing in the underground is an imprecise copy of the surface world garments. Adelaide was wearing a Michael Jackson t-shirt when she met her double, but Red's shirt has only a vague stain where the figures and letters should be. In a sense, what the underground world lacks is precisely this dimension of signifiers. Words and images are blurred. When Adelaide joins the group underground, she brings with her t-shirt language and representation. 30 years later, Adelaide returns to the surface, this time leading her nation of doubles in a bloody revolution against those of us on the surface. Us asks what happens when the body that is disciplined, cared for, measured, and institutionalized wants to be one of us, the people, that abstract subject of the nation. As the doubling suggests, they are two aspects of the same body politic. On the one hand is the population, something tended to, disciplined, policed, imprisoned, fed, healed, vaccinated, drugged, stimulated, and subdued. On the other hand is the people, the bearers of sovereignty and members of an imagined nation. This split, as modern as it might seem, has its roots in medieval law as the doctrine of the king's two bodies. A belief that the ruling monarch has both a natural body, that is an earthly, physical, and private one, and another that is symbolic and immortal. This strange distinction solved a number of problems for medieval people. How a king could be both a child, unable to exercise the full faculties of human reason, and yet be fully endowed with sovereign power. How a sick or incapacitated monarch could also rule, or how a king could hold private titles or lands that were not also property of the nation. The earthly physical body of the population is no less troubling for our contemporary politics than the frailty of the kings was to the medievals. Unlike clean legal distinctions between abstract individuals, this body tends to merge together. Its borders are porous, and sometimes it seems less like a collection of citizens than a single bundle of nerves, flesh, and tissue. In the film Us, this continuous body is represented by a charitable campaign called Hands Across America, an event to raise awareness around homelessness in the United States in the 1980s. The symbol of Hands Across America in the film is a line of stick figures connected at their hands so that one body flows seamlessly into the next. The film opens with an advertisement for Hands Across America, which asks us to imagine this continuous line of people holding hands as a single monstrous body. What has 12 million eyes, 192 million teeth, and stretches from the Golden Gate Bridge all the way to the Twin Towers? In many ways, the king's two bodies were not unlike the modern idea that corporations are legal subjects, that they have rights and can speak in court. I suppose we understand this as a persona ficta, a kind of mental trick that we acknowledge as artificial, but bind ourselves to nonetheless. What I think is important to think about, however, are the fictions that we cannot quite acknowledge, but seem to bind us still, the invisible fictions and the sacrifices that they demand. Part 3. Jort and Hugo de Groot look at each other without the slightest hint of surprise. Both continue with their respective tasks. Hugo flips and dusts off the fish, while Jort adjusts the thermostat. Finally, Jort breaks the silence. So how much is that fish anyway? Its price isn't set, Hugo explains, because it continues to inflate. You see, its value is tied to another fish. What other fish? Its identical twin. Jort, after many years of working in his father's fish shop, was not often surprised by what transpired there, but the notion of a fish with an identical twin gave him pause. You mean? Wait, what do you mean? Exactly what I said. The two fish were born conjoined, an uncommon but not unheard of occurrence. You see, they were attached at the stomach, and I very carefully separated them with my filleting knife. This one you see here died during the process, but I managed to save the other one. Hugo was beaming now. Jort, however, felt a little nervous. Had his father finally fallen into a private world of senile fantasy? What in God's name was he talking about? Identical fish? Surgically separating conjoined twins on his fish-cleaning bench? Sensing his son's confusion, Hugo motioned to Jort to follow him into the back room, where their endless game of checkers sat on top of a crate, the pieces never seeming to reduce in number. Hugo slid the crate to the edge of the room and began to roll up one end of the vinyl floor covering. Underneath was a large door hatch, and with one hefty movement, Hugo hauled the panel away, revealing a murky pool of liquid. Jort leaned down, peering deeply at the surface of the grayish water. Staring at its opaque, glassy texture, slight ripples reflecting the lights overhead, Jort thought about how he had always believed his small existence in the fish shop stood on solid ground. But it turns out they had always been floating. Stability a convincing but ultimately fragile illusion. In that gray water, he saw the real substance that lay under it all, a milky fluid in which all things dissolved. And he stood, ensorcelled over the water. A shadow began to rise from below, until Jort could see an enormous speckled creature. Suddenly an eyelid fluttered open, revealing an eyeball about the size of Jort's fist. Underneath the floor of their shop, Hugo had been growing a 6-meter-long fish. Part 4. I woke up this morning with a strange sensation. I didn't feel it immediately. I yawned as usual and then yawned again. So far, so good. I started to notice it when I pulled the covers off. The covers laid beside me, but I still felt compelled to remove them. I waited a moment to see if this was some kind of neurological delay, as if my brain had not quite figured out that the blankets had been lifted, like when you swallow a large pill and for some time after have the sensation that it's stuck in your throat, but nothing's really there. I waited a few seconds and then instinctively brought my hand to where the duvet had been and pretended to lift the covers again. Then finally, I felt the sheets had been successfully displaced, as if my pantomime had found an invisible second set of linens and removed them. Confused and slightly concerned, I slowly dragged my legs over the edge of the bed and sat upright. As I sat on the edge of my bed, I felt as if I was still tied to some pair of legs that remained laying horizontally, and similarly my torso and head still felt as if they were resting on a pillow. It's not that I didn't feel the ground beneath my feet, or the weight of my body as I sat up, or gravity's pull on my shoulders. But I felt I had something behind me, another body laying next to me. I could not stand up without feeling the weight of the sleeping corpse holding me to the mattress. Having had such good results with repetition when pulling off the sheets, I got back into bed in the same position as I had awoken and tried once again to sit up, and thankfully felt this second body's weight follow my movements until it too was sitting upright in bed. And so I proceeded with the rest of my morning, but performing each action twice. Once for myself, and again for this second self, which seemed to drag itself alongside me. I brushed my teeth twice, as my mouth did not feel any cleaner after the first time. I took 2 showers. I made 2 cups of coffee, but not actually wanting to drink the second cup, I poured it down the drain. But this was perhaps a mistake, as my second body has been moving a little sluggishly ever since. When getting dressed, I tried hard to fight the impulse to put on my clothes twice. It seemed absurd to take off a shirt I had just put on, as I could see as plain as day that I was wearing it, but nonetheless I could not shake the feeling that I was still exposed, my chest and round stomach visible to anyone, including the neighbors, as my curtains were wide open, and so I undressed and dressed myself again. I've been wondering what about today has caused this new and frankly unwelcome experience. My first thoughts went to a medical condition. Was something amiss in my nervous system or brain chemistry? But the more I continued my repetitions, performing every action twice, the more it suggested to me a neurotic tic, that somehow I simply cannot consider an action complete until it is doubled, the same way that obsessive compulsives must perform elaborate rituals to rid themselves of feelings of uncleanliness or disorder. But there remains something physical in this passive body that slumps next to me until I animate it. I feel its weight, independent from, but attached to my own. Being neither a psychologist nor a neurologist, I can't investigate the causes any further. But I had one more passing thought. I wondered if this second body had, in fact, always been there, but until today we have been moving in total synchrony. Our actions were perfect mirrors of each other, and so I simply never noticed it before because it, or he, had always moved along with me in perfect unison. Then the question is not as what changed in my body or mind, but what happened to my double. What caused him to go limp? Why must I now animate us both? To tell the truth, I think the second body is really there, or really somewhere, even if I can't see it. I don't think it is purely a product of bad nerves or some kind of inner ear infection. Even now, I feel as if I should be reading this text to you twice. I will restrain myself, because no one wants to hear the same text twice. But when I am back in my hotel room tonight, I will read it again, because I cannot shake the feeling that somewhere my double is waiting for me to read the text aloud for him. And in front of him, your doubles are waiting to hear it. Part 5. You see, fish are not like us. They live in a context with far less gravity than we do. Their proportions are not constrained by their environment. I separated these 2 fish, and one is a regular size. A normal fish, that's barely even a scratch where that cut was made. The other I have been attempting to grow to see what natural limits, if any, exist on the size of a fish. It's like the plant that adapts to the size of the pot. Every time my fish gets bigger, I put it in a bigger container. It started in a modest tank, and now I've had to renovate the basement to be a small aquarium. I'm not, as you may think, just trying to experiment for the sake of curiosity or perversity. I hope, in fact, to become very rich. As we all know, the problem with fish is that at the moment they are caught, they have reached their maximum value. Having been caught, they will, of course, get no bigger. And the more time goes by, the closer they get to spoiling. The fish seller is always desperate to sell yesterday's catch, to make room for today's before it begins to rot. We are in a terrible negotiating position. Just wait till the end of the day, and we're at your mercy. I needed a fish that would increase in value, potentially infinitely, because fish, like money, are completely, what's that word again? Liquid, suggested Yort. No, it's another one. A word you think would apply better to mushrooms. Ah yeah, fungible. Fish are fungible. So you've been growing this fish for a long time, but surely someday it must end. It will reach maturity, its life power will diminish, and maybe it won't shrink, but surely it will age and die. Yort, that's the beauty. As it gets bigger, its metabolism slows. With every added kilogram of fish flesh, its heart beats a little slower. The mechanisms that wear out and collapse within its body function a little more gently and gradually. Maybe someday it enters into a state of suspended animation, a cryogenic freeze in which all cell death is arrested. I see no reason to assume that this inflationary movement will ever come to an end. But I apologize for this minor digression. Your actual question was why I couldn't set a price on that average-sized and by all appearances ordinary fish in the case. You see, these fish, as I mentioned, are monozygotic twins, a fertilized egg that has divided into two separate but identical embryos. They share the exact same genetic sequence, so this one on ice is a perfect copy of its mammoth sibling, at least as far as genes go. The two are forever tied together, but as the one grows, so the other withers. The process of decay only distills the fish to its essence, a liquid that we can just pour into a jar, fish as fluid as currency. As the sibling expands infinitely, the other disappears into total abstraction. Hugo had entered into a state of reverie, intoxicated by fantasies of limitless growth and liquid fish. Part 6. You say twins, and I think of the Twin Towers. That's just how my mind works. I was 16 when they exploded at my school in New Jersey, about 45 kilometers, as the crow flies, to lower Manhattan. We didn't have TVs inside the school, so I didn't really see images of the buildings until I got home, by which point they had already collapsed. So what I actually remember from that day is a fourth period gym class. I think we were playing soccer, or maybe capture the flag, when an F-15 jet flew right above us. It flickered against the sky for a moment, and everyone stopped running after the ball and looked up. We all stood motionless, staring at the cloudless sky, a little too long, well past the point of seeing any trace of the plane, left to ponder only the loud roar that lingered in its absence. We seemed to be monitoring the empty blue field itself, looking for what, I'm not sure. So when you say twins, I think of something which fails to appear. Honestly, I never thought that much about the twinness of the towers, although Jean Baudrillard, the French philosopher, did write, after the fact, that the two World Trade Center towers were the perfect embodiment of this definitive order, precisely in their twin nature. Thank you.
Ich freue mich jetzt, die dritte und letzte Lesende des Abends vorzustellen, Sanna Helena Berger. Sehr kurz und knapp die Vorstellung. Sanna Helena Berger works with site and situation-specific installations. situation aesthetic, and post-institutional critique. Written text and performed monologues exist either as coupling discourse to her work or an autonomous composition in which Berger melange humour with theory, with language as topic, set in a non-form, and undisciplined structure opposing a finish. So, happy to welcome you on stage, Sanna. Thank you.
Eine Einleitung zu dieser Lesung über das Lesen. Den Text, den ihr gleich hören werdet, habe ich zu diesem Zeitpunkt fertig geschrieben. Während ich Andrea Büttners Buch Shame lese, fällt mir auf, dass diesem Text noch eine Einleitung fehlt. Eine Einleitung, durch die ich, so die Hoffnung, meine sonst vorbehaltenen Zweifel sichtbar machen und dadurch überwinden kann. Vorausgesetzt, man glaubt daran, Ängste bei Namen nennen zu müssen, sie zu bezwingen. Texte zu schreiben und sie vorzutragen, fällt mir eigentlich leicht. Nur was ihre Länge betrifft, bin ich unschlüssig. Meistens schreibe ich längere Texte und der folgende ist vergleichsweise lang geworden. Doch zum Glück geht es hier heute um das Lesen, um Worte und ihre Bedeutung, um Texte zum Nachdenken. Oft habe ich das Gefühl, in meinem Text langatmig, auszufernd und abschweifend zu werden. Manchmal drohen diese Zweifel im Scham überzukippen, stolpern dann aber in unzweifelhaftere Gefilde zurück, indem ich lakonische, prägnantere Aussagen hier und da einstreue. Doch weil ich absichtlich tautologische Prosa schreibe und sie wissentlich in langwierige Formlosigkeit hülle, liegt es voll in der Sprache selbst, dass sich einige von euch schon bald langweilen werde, doch vielleicht diese Bedenken, nun beim Namen genannt, also bezwungen, ist dem vorgebeugt und ihr werdet euch alle köstlich amüsieren. I tried to sleep, but I've drunk too much coffee. But just as I am finally about to drift off, my daughter starts crying. She doesn't know why or how to stop it. It's something she does sometimes. She's been sleeping poorly for 5 years and 7 months, or thereabouts. She is now 5 years and 7 months, or thereabouts. Sometimes I deal with this very well, caring, comforting, compassionate, and considerate. I caveat with the following to exonerate myself before my inevitable judgment. I try a gentle approach, it does not end. I try another tender method, it does not stop. I try another compassionate technique, it does not change, and suddenly I am so tired I can barely stand. Her cry pierces a hole in me from which leaks my ability to be caring, comforting, compassionate, and considerate. It trickles out of me at first, and then it pours. I am but an empty filter, a flume without content. My suddenly emptied self has no support system to stand caring. And even though I just a moment ago was not able to sleep, I now am not able to stay not asleep for even the briefest moment longer. And the compassion which has drained from my body is but the echo of care, replaced by a self vexed. Callous and unkind, at the end of my tether, at the end of one's tether, an idiom suggesting a point of extreme exhaustion and distress, the breaking point where someone feels they can no longer bear the burden of their problems, which I've always wondered about. At the end of the tether, does one lose grip of the tether? Does the restraint snap? Do you voluntarily let go and let yourself fall into the abyss from the apex that you've thus been tethered to? Is the tether your leash restraining you, or is it the tack keeping you in check? Fully untethered, I lift my daughter out of bed and turn on the light. I stand in front of her and asks her what she wants to do now. How does she suggest we end it? She is 5 years and 7 months, or thereabout. She asks me why. Why, in a long drawn-out cry. Why, pronounced phonetically like an upper-middle-class British man delivering a 1920s BBC report. Why? Why have I done this? I don't know why. I have done it because I have lost it. I have lost the it, even though I am not sure what it is, but it's the substance to which I'm normally tethered, from which I've let loose and am instead unfettered, unbridled and unsympathetic. I've lost the substance, the one you're not supposed to lose when you're a mother. In response to this mere 1 second act of malevolence starts to spread an acute and immediate remorse. Nothing no longer trickles, but it all gushes into a gulf of regret, flooding furiously, a gulf of fizzing and sizzling guilt. You've stopped feeling shame. You are shame, a stigma personified, a stain on your own character. Und als Reaktion auf diesem nur eine Sekunde währenden botschaftmarinierten Akt beginnen sich nun akute und unmittelbare Gewissenbisse auszubreiten. Nicht tröpfelt mehr, sondern strömt wie in einen Abgrund des Bedauerns, überflutend, wütend, brödelnd und knisternd vor Schuld. Du hast aufgehört, Scham zu empfinden. Du bist Scham, ein Stigma in Person, ein Schandfleck auf deinem eigenen Charakter. I have become the epitome of shame, a paragon in the negative, the geist of guilt, the proof that I am a bad mother. The shame is unbearable, but I know soon enough the guilt is coming. The guilt I know is not worth the millisecond of sadistic catharsis I get from yanking her out of bed, because now I am imbued with the shame and consumed with its guilt. And even though I am standing in the middle of the room, I am suddenly, brutally shoved into a corner, the corner of shame. And I tell my 5-year-old daughter this, that I am experiencing tremendous shame for my actions, which, admitting is an embarrassment magnified because of the self-pity I embody with this confession, and my misplaced atonement through self-punishment. once acknowledging it to my daughter, and once acknowledging it to you. A confession and a performance of a confession. A confession which just causes her more pain and doubles down mine, because now she is crying a different kind of cry, a pleading cry, a protective cry. I have manipulated the situation into becoming one where I am protected by my own daughter from myself. Don't say that. Don't say that you're a bad mommy. You're not a bad mommy. You're the best mommy. I love you. I love you more than anything I know. She's comforting me because I did something bad to her. I tell her she'll only understand this when she's older, which of course I tell myself. So much of motherhood is reflexive, a mirror as well as a retrospective understanding of your own mother. I could never have fully understood my mother until facing the mirror in which I see my mother mothering me, and can't help but mother my daughter through this double exposure. And so by simple logic, I know that someday, if she wants and can, my daughter could lose it at her daughter, and the cyclical guilt moves through the maternal line like a DNA of shame. I lift her up off the floor and into my bed. I let her sleep there next to me, gripping her little palm tightly, kissing her forehead until she falls asleep. Stroking her hair until long after, simmering in my own guilt, but feeling okay about being human, largely thanks to the forgiveness of my own child. I cry a bit. She hears it in her half-awake, half-asleep state and says, eyes closed, "Don't cry, you're not a bad mommy." Turns over and out. I cry more. It is a mixture of sweet and salty tears. I lie awake thinking that this could be the start of the text I'll write for my reading at Westfälischer Kunstverein in June. When I tell my friend Lian this is what I'll be writing about, suitably hanging out at the playground, he comes to think of psychologist Donald Winnicott's concept of the good enough mother. I never heard of it before, but always find myself suitably skeptical of looking anything up about motherhood written by men, particularly ones born in 1896. In the same way, I felt myself becoming agitated when recommended to take a class on breathing through the pain of labor, eponymously named by its inventor, Fernand Lamaze, which, quite frankly and without poetry, having given birth without painkillers, I can tell you is a scam. There are many techniques to survive going through pain which they say equates to breaking every bone in one's body simultaneously, but there are no techniques to achieve painless birth without painkillers, and even then, other pain persists. If anyone developed such techniques, it would have been a woman who had given birth, presumably over and over to fine-tune the technique, not a man who ranked women's performance in childbirth from excellent to complete failure on the basis of their relentlessness and screams. Those who failed were themselves responsible because they harbored doubts and had not practiced sufficiently, and rather predictably, intellectual women who asked too much questions were the most certain to fail. There are many philosophical dimensions to the birthing process in theory, whereas in reality, most of the metaphysical self goes into exile in order to leave as much power as possible to the somatic. When my mother is pregnant with me in 1983, she is recommended to take a Lamaze class. When I am pregnant 35 years later, I am recommended to take a Lamaze class. Whilst the pain of becoming a mother and the pain of being a mother and the pain of expectations of motherhood all feel different and can be assigned different glossaries to correspond with the severity of the pain in a wildly oversimplified and degrading way, just as physical pain. How I would love to speak openly of a mother's shame, a mother's guilt, without fear of being shamed in the double. When Rachel Cusk publishes a life's work, she becomes the archetype of the bad intellectual mother. Alongside her already existing archetype of the bourgeoisie woman writer, inundated with criticism, not for her writing, and I mention her not for her writing, but for the symbol she embodied of withholding the sanctimoniousness of motherhood. Even Sylvia Plath left a plate of sandwiches and glasses of milk for her children before her self-inflicted asphyxiation. Cusk seems to have made the metaphorical and literal fatal mistake of confessing, in a moment of desperate exhaustion, that she had questioned her newfound motherhood and whether she should have become a mother at all. It is as if we are losing all nuance on the topic of motherhood, all ability to accept complexity, tolerate ambiguity, all reason to understand that there are waves of incomprehensible difficulties about raising another being, and instead think of this as a binary. The pervasive disnification of life, good, bad. I started thinking, when I started thinking about writing this text, that it would touch on shame, beginning with the urgent shame that I intermittently feel around being a mother, and then traverse into being a flawed artist, a topic so many of my texts envelop into their themes. It finds its way in, unintentionally, as if on purpose. Unintentionally as much as if one eats tomato sauce whilst wearing a crisp white shirt, one can imagine the outcome. And there is always a stain on what I do. There is always an inadequacy in what I finish, always a tear or a spot, smudge or smear on my person. When wearing a new blue shirt, looking good for a dinner at which I'd like to look good for, feeling unusually presentable, I dribble white toothpaste down its front right before leaving. When I am at my own opening, and this has happened more than once, suddenly the heel of one of my shoes comes off and I spend the whole evening limping or in socks. There is always a rip, a tear somewhere in a garment I'm wearing. One can niggle a little finger into and be met with skin. But perhaps besmirched is my unfettered, whilst put together is my restraint. I've been thinking about Chantal Akerman. She has been present in my mind again after a hiatus from teenage to mid-20s adoration. Because recently I stayed with a friend whilst working in Stockholm. He's a Chantal Akerman self-instituted scholar of sorts, translating a book about Akerman from French into Swedish, or is it German? I forget. He speaks them all. Benjamin is his name. And so after considering sharing my shame in this reading, I think of asking Benjamin to translate this experience into a scene. As if for a short film in which the subtext is the guilt of motherhood, as if written by and then filmed by Chantal Akerman and then translated into German so that I can transcribe the script and share it here with you in your mother tongue. A script for a scene you have to imagine being filmed in Chantal Akerman's style, head on, camera still, most likely a recounting of the event itself. Time passes by as shame transpires through different stages, like light shifting. Slowly, one arrives at guilt and remorse. Perhaps a pot is simmering in the background, steam rising. I am sent a book by a professor whose work I follow, by an author who's written a book about Ackermann, which is not yet for circulation, so I can't quote from it, but under its Schmutztitel, the dedication reads, "For my mother." This is as close as you'll ever come to me telling a joke. Motherhood can be such a pun, such an easy out, such a psychoanalytical trope and archetypal motif, a container for that which seems universal because the mother itself, as a role, is universal, which makes it possible to create cliches and why it might be difficult to allow complexities and individual subjective experience when we're speaking about something so banal as mothers. We all have one. And whilst I'm sure this would not be a method that suits everyone, I have found that only through becoming a mother have I come to know my own mother. That means that for 35 years, I was strangely objective about my own mother's motherhood, somewhat of a spectator of her life, as it seemed to have mainly enacted a kind of circumstantial milieu for my own life. Her purpose seemed mainly that of maintaining my own, even as a fully fledged person out of utero. But when I became a mother myself, I suddenly saw her, not in relation to myself, but in relation to herself, experiencing mothering me. I started to experience her reflexivity through my own experience of the kind of love, pain, exhaustion, devotion, insanity, awe, and disembodiment I was facing. And for many years I walked around in wonder that I could have been loved as much as I love my daughter. Thus, the understanding of love itself became tangled up with the fact that I have never felt more loved in retrospect, because I love in the present. Likewise, I started to reflect on the stages of that love, the attachment, my own pubescent rejection and detachment, my sudden shift of perception of her role, her self-being, and omnipresent in all stages, my fear of losing her, as the inevitable truth of life is death. When Ackermann ends her life at 65, her documentary about her mother has just been released. In an interview shortly after her mother's passing and shortly before taking her own life, Ackermann asks, "Now that my mother is no longer here, will I still have something to say?" I wonder, if Ackermann's mother would have told her everything, would she have had so much to say? So much to explore about silence, time, the presence of absence, withholding as sense-making in scene-making. By withholding from her daughter, her mother refused to share her own extreme trauma, which in turn translates into Ackermann's search for scenes in which the unspoken says it all. I know I am not supposed to speculate, given the sheer pointlessness of speculating and the political and personal negation of Ackermann's choices and character, but I mean no harm and speculate nonetheless. As we do, colored by our own experiences. What would have happened to Ackermann's understanding of her own mother had she herself become one? There is no greater sphere of privacy precisely because it is so public. All our origins of life, which is also what makes it the most complex, unending of topics in philosophy, psychology, literature, film, art, poetry, etc., ad nauseum. It is a wholly mystical event staged in the most banal and mundane settings. And within the domestication of the role that gives us life lies a myth, which perhaps is necessary for us to render ordinary because of the bizarre and at times unacceptable truth of birth and death. As Ackermann's mother is dying and Ackermann herself is not only witnessing her undoing but documenting it, she shows us a double exposure. An embodiment of her mother in herself and of her mother herself, a mother to whom she devotes not only her films but her time, her life's work's topic. But it seems to me that she cannot stop at mere documenting, observing and objectifying her mother, but that through documenting, observing and objectifying her mother, she creates a hold on life as fiction, in which her film about her mother is actually a biopic about herself, observing her mother, observing her. Ackermann moves around and with and through the image. She passes by, arranging the self as if to allocate the mother. We're seeing her, but also we're not seeing her. But in these shifty moves, she reflexively positions herself. And I find it a kind of science fiction in which the mother and the daughter bleed into each other, and knowing how motherhood begins, founded in the inseparability of self and child, I view the film as a documented redux. The present knowing that the mother will die and that the daughter will be present. The feeling as if this is a film not to document time, but to end the documentation of time. A dramaturgy of the now rhetorical question, now that my mother is no longer here, will I still have something to say? Every life begins with a meticulous labor of documentation. Documenting and registering every shift, change, movement, growth. It is a listening in, impossible without the becoming of the new protagonist coming to the stage. Having housed my daughter, having documented her every in utero hiccup, and once out of womb, listen attentively to her every breath for at least a year to record her still living, one discovers the documentation of motherhood. When one cannot shower a single time in the first year for longer than 4 continuous minutes because the pressure of the water creates a distant noise that simulates your baby's cries. The archiving of motherhood, of noises, movements, signals, the detailing of minute and minuscule events, some fast, urgent and acute, but mainly slow-moving, panning, light shifting, a lens capturing objective subjectivity, imbued with views of oneself through one's child, not quite knowing where one begins and the other ends, years of slowly separating to become two autonomies, but then again, never truly separate. I interpret Ackermann's final film as a passage in reverse, closing in on that which is given at birth, its inseparability, as a deliberate final stage of moving together, a regenesis paradox, a cyclical denouement, in which the documentary acts as exposition. Through its document, we enter into a third view. We witness the dying of the mother and the inability of her daughter living on without her, having affixed herself to the character of her mother as raison d'être, which ultimately answers Ackermann's rhetorical question through Ackermann's film, even before Ackermann would end her own life. Someone said that she has an ecology of images, that something becomes something, and then something else. Perhaps there were no more films to make, because she had become diluted with her own subjectivity. Thus, the event, which in so many of her films happens cataclysmically, in this film happens off camera. It happens to Ackerman herself, by her own hand. She remains the director. And so much of life, real life, lived life, live life, happens off camera. It is rare that any part of real life gets documented as it is lived. Instead, we are left with fiction and adaptation, shame in moderation, the self from an angle we can accept as to be accepted by. Of course, we know life and death is in reality never as poetic as this. And it is easy to desire in fiction, in film, in poetry and prose, what you never be able to handle or even want in real life. So stark too is the disparity between the complexities we allow characters to possess, whom we experience in fiction, on celluloid, on paper, voiced by the poet. Idiosyncrasies deemed desirable, Delphic and compelling, yet juxtaposed with the mundanity of life, often turn out to be difficult, taxing, and deranged. No matter the technique, once we are at safe distance from disarray, erratic intellect, borderline non-compos mentis, we can appreciate it as art. But once these incongruous matters enters our life, when we break the fourth wall of what is told and what is hidden, we experience a split in personality between what we desire to desire and what we truly want. In my half-asleep state, when I first decide to confess my motherly shame, I see myself sitting on top of a sofa turned sideways to form a pillar, my feet dangling like a child's on a too-tall stool, a pedestal which acts as a kind of mundane monument. Or maybe I am the monument atop the pillar, an ode to the mundanity of life, such as the ones Ackerman captured, none of which included standing one's most loved person on the floor in a room, blaring the lights on and suffering for days as a consequence. I think of what else Benjamin has in his bookshelf, a great source of joy as I visit him. Lying on the coarse woven raffia rug, flipping through the various collected accomplishments. A bookshelf can be a space of great hesitancy, of potential shame or potential celebration. Andrea Butner develops a triangle graph, at the top of it which stands I am ashamed, extending on either side of something and in the presence of others. Here I am at the apex of that triangle as I share something with an audience, you. No shame found. I compliment him on his collection. It's mostly Peter Weiss's, he says, which intrigues, and it turns out he means this literally. When Peter Weiss and later his wife and collaborator Gunilla Palmstierna Weiss passed away, the estate or whoever sold off their books for 50 cents a pop. Something of an allegory for something not worth analyzing further, something nihilistic to do with legacy and futility. Inside the book, however, on a more optimistic note, one finds a stamp saying their names. Each book bears this stamp. I do not know if this was done posthumously or when Peter and Gunilla were alive. Did they do this, or did an agent or a mediator? I like to think they did it, mark their books with their names, but no matter who did it, there in the stamp lives Peter and Gunilla on. I see it not as an emblem of ownership, but as a proof of living with. Peter and Gunilla lived with these books, and now these books live with Benjamin. Should we all make small stamps and leave our marks on more things so that we create an insignia of a life lived, or of information digested, of poetry ingested? My grandmother used to keep little handwritten notes under things, assigning them to family members when she died. I do not know if I ever got such a note, because I was never given a particular thing after she died, but I remember having conversations with her about what I wanted when she was still alive. Children can be oblivious to the faux pas of death. I think of my matter that I have accumulated and of my daughter as the sole heir of everything. I think of my legacy for her, my leavings of life for her. Suddenly I live not only contemporaneously but posthumously, and I think this is the only real life after death, the one we experience whilst living. I think of the text I have written for her, committed to record in some tech mess, which might prove difficult to entangle in the future. As if my mother had written me an opus left on a CD-ROM or diskette or some other antiquated medium. And the ex libris stamp in the books makes me realize that the only real consistently modern mode of writing to someone in the future is by hand, pen to paper. To store it in a physical place, to put your stamp on time. Ackermann's archive is digitized, which seems like the forever medium of our time. But I do wonder if that's not just because our scope of time is too small. These marks, these stamps, they keep us alive. It's a hand in the fire of the testament of time. I read once, or was it said in a film, that the best thing you can do for your grandchildren is to plant fruit trees. Then, every time they eat a deliciously ripe pear, or a cold, crisp apple, or a soft and sweet fig, they will think of you. And you will be alive once again. Having a child is, of course, a way of staying alive a little longer. But there is a kind of solitude also in knowing that you'll never truly know the sadness of being the one that has left, leaving others behind. An impossible thought. I think of the fortune, especially now, daily, of being able to live with and alongside my daughter. I think of all the things I could save for her, save her from, and the impossibility of it standing the test of time. But I think of words as withstanding almost everything, ultimately, and so I say sorry now for not having been more compassionate that night I lost my temper, and sorry for all the times that will inevitably come, and that I will forgive her in the future for all the times she'll drag me out of bed and put me in the spotlight. And I hope the time will come when I have the luxury to see her document life in whatever medium she chooses, and feel certain she'll put a stamp on it.